you're safe and warm and working on your classes. I hope that this comes across well. It's a different room for me, and I think it's going to be a little bit of perspective interesting because my desk is there, and so is the computer and the camera and all that fun stuff. So, sorry if you see a little too much of me, but that's just how it works. Okay. So this is chapter 3, and actually the first part of chapter 3, like we have here on the agenda. I'm a little bit weird about how I fill out the board, but that's okay. It works for me. So chapter 3 is making sense of arguments. 3A, we have a little bit of an intro, reminder of what argument means and that kind of stuff. And then argument basics. We're going to get into the differences between deductive and inductive arguments, and just know that we're going to focus on deductive in chapters, in the 3rd unit, and then inductive in the 4th unit. So we've got another unit after this that's kind of figuring out some things. So we're going to give you, this is kind of the scaffolding for your brain to build on stuff so that we can do stuff you've never seen before later on. So anyway, making sense of arguments. So the second piece is about judging arguments, and really it's a 4-step process that tells us how to figure out if we have an argument, first of all, and if we have an argument, what kind of argument is it? Is it deductive or is it inductive? Please, please, please keep in the back of your head, there are only 2 types of arguments we're going to be working with for the whole book, deductive and inductive. An argument can only be one or the other. Okay, can't be both. So in the exercises, when they're asking you things like, is this deductive or inductive? Is this valid or weak? It can only be one of those. And so don't give me both answers. That's just not how that works. Anyway, so the 4-step process shows us how to go about deciding whether an argument is deductive or inductive and whether it's a good argument at all. Okay? And then in that section, we have a further thought about the smart way to argue online. And then we have a fun little one on when reasoning wrecks. It says, leave the scene of the accident. And the last piece for section A is 3.3, which is finding missing parts, working with implicit premises, things that you're supposed to just already know, which is great when you're talking about an argument, not so great when you're trying to evaluate. Okay, so we're going to get through these 3, and then we'll break it up and do 3B, which is the other 2 parts, 3.4 and 3.5. So, just so you know. Words. The whole background here, of course, is arguments. Okay, what's an argument? An argument
is a group of statements in which some of them, premises, are intended to support another of them, the conclusion. Now, one thing I want you to notice here, the premises and the conclusion are in parentheses. When you do these, when you write these out for a test, please don't leave those out. They're not optional, okay? This is the quotation marks, beginning to end, right? So make sure that you're actually using all the words from the definition in the book, okay? Deductive argument, the first one we're going to talk about, is intended to provide logically conclusive support for its conclusion, okay? An inductive argument is intended to provide probable, not conclusive, support for its conclusion. And again, that stuff there between the dashes is important, okay? It's not conclusive. It's not a broken or a bad deductive argument. It's a different kind of argument whose whole point is to say, this is the most likely answer. We don't know 100% for sure, for whatever reason, but this is the best answer. And we spend five chapters in the book out of 13 talking about specific about inductive. We like deductive because it's yes or no. It's either true or false. There's no sliding scale.
And we like it because it's cut and dry. We like black and white. Yes? But where we really live is inductive. Okay? Inductive is all of the possibilities, from the very tiniest possibility to the that's going to happen. And it's where we live every day, right? It's partial credit, it's the gray area, it's all the things that we do on a daily basis because they're important to do, but it's not a deductive argument. It's not cut and dry. When you get right down to it, not a whole lot in our lives is absolute, and so we need to kind of embrace that. Anyway, I'm going to work through some things. I'm going to stand a little closer to you. Sorry about that, but this is how it has to go. So chapter 3 starts on page 65 in the book. If you want to follow along, or if you have the notes already, you can do that. But anyway, so to recognize an argument, you must be able to identify the premises and the conclusion of that argument. Indicator words such as because and since often signal the presence of premises, and words such as therefore, thus, hence, so can point us to a conclusion. Okay, but as we said in chapter 1, I think it was, not all arguments have indicator words. They're perfectly good arguments, but they don't have indicator words, and sometimes those indicator words can be used in other ways. So just beware. In the argument basics section, the big sentence at the beginning here is the point of devising or formulating an argument is to try to show that a statement or claim is worthy of acceptance. I mean, why bother if it's not a good reason, right? It doesn't have good reasons. The point of evaluating an argument, then, is to see whether this task has been successful, whether the argument shows that the statement, conclusion, really is worthy of acceptance. And that's the gist of the whole rest of the book, okay? But we're going to, of course, parse that out, explain that out a little bit. So arguments come in two forms. We've already said that, but an argument, a deductive argument, is logically conclusive support if it manages to do that. So if all your premises are true, then your conclusion has to be true, okay? If you have true premises and a false conclusion, you have an invalid argument, okay? So, and we'll spend lots of time on that in the middle section. Deductive argument, of course, and here's kind of the way they lay out. They're very different from each other. They're both arguments. They both have premises and conclusions. They both have evidence. It's just what's their intent, okay? That's the intended part, okay? First of all, deductive arguments are conclusive, okay? They are meant to give us absolute truth, okay? I'm going to say okay way too much. Sorry. And in logic, let me get there, sorry. I'm going to turn my page to book. So, conclusive, evidence, and support. Valid or invalid refers to structure, okay? Do the premises and conclusions fit together? Do they follow a valid form? And one thing I love about Dr. Vaughn's book is he gives you lots and lots and lots of examples, okay? So you have a chance to kind of walk through stuff, and if the first one doesn't grab you, the second or third or fourth one will. And so in logic, valid is not a synonym for true. In our out and about life, we use those two words largely interchangeably. And in logic, in what we're looking at now, they're different. Okay, so that's something that's got to kind of rewire in your head. But logical structure refers not to the content of an argument, but to its construction, the way the premises and conclusions fit together. Because of the guarantee of truth in the conclusion, deductively valid arguments are said to be truth-preserving. Okay, and that's a big topic, a big deal. Okay, if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true in valid deductive arguments. And so the last thing is, so we have a structure, we have conclusive evidence and support, we have the valid structure, and then we have to look at the actual truth of the argument. It's not worth spending your time on figuring out the truth if it's already invalid, right? So if you have a valid argument, then you want to know, okay, is this stuff really true? Are the premises true? Well, yes. Is the conclusion true? Well, yes. Okay, so then we have a sound argument, okay? And all of these words, conclusive, valid, and sound, work only for deductive arguments, okay? Only for deductive arguments. And I love his little, his examples there. All dogs have fleas. Bowser is a dog, so Bowser has fleas. And he calls it a golden oldie. But all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal. And both of those are kind of a mix of different type. Anyway, they're not what we're going to look at for the rest of the chapter, which is really kind of funny. So we know about valid and invalid argument fails in structure. So we go back to that. And then we have inductive arguments, right? Inductive arguments are intended, okay, to give probable evidence and support, okay? And of course, you're going to see things like sometimes, maybe, probable, and that's going to click in that, okay, this isn't an absolute argument, so this has to be an inductive argument. We talk about the structure, again, it's either strong or weak. Does it fit together well? Does one premise follow into the other premise, follow into the conclusion? Or do we have something else going on? And if it is probable evidence and support, strong structure, then we look to see about the truth, like we do with a deductive argument. The premises and conclusion, are they really true? If they are, then it's cogent. And cogent just it's a Latin derivative word. It just means thoughtful, okay? So it's not some weird thing. And if we're going to kind of move on to the other things here, an inductive argument that succeeds in providing probable, not conclusive, logical support for its conclusion is said to be a strong argument. And inductive argument that fails to provide such support is said to be a weak argument, okay? Now, again, in this case, strong and weak does not refer to the truth of the argument, it refers to the structure. And so we have that thing. If we're going to look at our examples, the deductive looks one way. Inductive, most dogs have fleas. So my dog Bowser probably has fleas. 98% of humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, so Socrates is likely to be immortal. Not right, to be immortal. Okay. Logical validity or logical strength is an essential characteristic of a good argument, but there is more to a good argument than just having proper structure. And on page 68, Dr. Vaughn gives us a couple examples. The first one is, all pigs can fly. Vaughn is a pig, so Vaughn can fly. Okay. The conclusion follows logically. It has support. If both of the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. So we're working on it. It's all good. But none of these are true. Pigs can't fly. Vaughn is not a pig, and the conclusion is just ridiculous, right? The kind of support that a deductive argument can give a conclusion is absolute. Either the conclusion is shown to be true or it's not. There is no sliding scale of truth or falsity. Like we talked about in chapter 2, that whole subjectivist relativism doesn't work. It's not true, okay? We need to stop saying things like, well, that may be true for you. No, opinions are different from truth. Sometimes they can be true, but they don't necessarily have to be in order to be your opinion. So, okay. We've gone through enough about those. We're going to come back to them in a minute anyway. So, and I forgot to put that up there. In 3.1, on page 69, there's a little box about arguments about necessary and sufficient conditions. Now, we're going to spend a bit more time on this in the last unit with inductive, but this is important. So, and it's kind of weird, so good luck with that. Necessary conditions are the features that a thing must have in order to be that thing. Okay? So a bird is kind of the umbrella category. And then you have to be a bird before you can be an eagle. Okay, that's kind of an easy one. Sufficient conditions are conditions that conditions that guarantee something exists or is a certain kind of thing. And some conditions in an argument are both. Okay, they're necessary to show that this is a thing, and it's also sufficient to guarantee that this is a thing. Okay, the bird and eagle thing kind of sticks there. It's not something that you have to really worry about, but it's something that's going to come up again and again. So it's good to have a little bit of a running around the back of your head. My back of my head must be really busy. So, okay, 3.2, judging arguments. This is a big deal for this chapter, and a lot of folks mix it up. There in chapter 3, there are 3 big processes that we're going to talk about. One is judging arguments. It has 4 steps. One is filling in implicit premises. It has 3 steps. And then later on, when we're diagramming an argument, it has 5 steps. So make sure you attach the right number of steps to the right process. Okay. So 4 steps for judging arguments. When you come face to face with an argument to evaluate, 1, how can you tell whether it's deductive or inductive? And 2, how can you determine whether it gives you good reasons for accepting the conclusion? Basically, whether it's sound or cogent. So step 1, this sounds very weird and easy. Find the argument's conclusion and then its premises. Okay. Now, we talked about this back in chapter 1 about the best, the best advice for anybody working with arguments is to find the conclusion first. So read the argument and go, okay, they're trying to claim that X is true. Okay, so that's your conclusion. So anything that supports that is a premise. Okay, anything that gives you more reason, gives you more evidence to believe that this is true, that's your premise. Okay, and usually there are more than one premise. Lots of premises. Okay, for what we're doing mostly in this chapter, until we get to the diagramming part, which is different. Most of our arguments have 3 parts, 2 premises and a conclusion, so not too bad. Step 2, ask, is it the case that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true? If yes, treat that argument as deductive. Okay, if at this point in the argument analysis, you already know, oh yes, if the premises are true, this has to be true. You have a deductive argument. It might not be valid, or, it might not be sound, but we already know it's valid because the structure works and it has the support. Okay, so it's deductive, it's also valid, so check to see if it's sound. Look and see if things are actually true. Okay. If your answer to the first question, premises are true kind of thing, if not, move on to step 3. Okay. If it breaks down at any point, move on to step 3. Step 3 is to ask, is it the case that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is probably true? So we're looking at inductive. Okay, so if that's the impression first off, yes, okay, it's inductive, it's also strong, so check to see if it's cogent. Okay, are the premises true? Is the conclusion true? Yay, then you have an inductive argument. You have a strong, cogent, inductive argument. If no, or if it breaks down at any point in step 3, then you go to step 4. And you ask, is the argument intended to offer conclusive or probable support for its conclusion, but fails to do so? Okay, if you get to step 4, you have a failed argument. You just have to kind of figure out what you're supposed to be looking at. And so step 4 says, okay, so we're on step 4, we've eliminated the chances for a good argument, so we need to know what kind of failed argument we have. Guideline 1 says, if the argument looks deductive or inductive because of its form, treat it as such. If that's still not helpful, guideline 2, if the argument looks deductive or inductive because of indicator words and its form yields no clues, treat it as such. Basically, give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, you were trying for a deductive argument, but you failed. Okay. So each of these steps, you have to do step 1. That one's everything, conclusion, premises. Step 2, if it turns out to be not deductive, then you just write NA, not applicable. For step 3, if it's not inductive, it's NA. If it turns out that your thing was deductive, so step 1 has the premises and conclusion, step 2 has deductive, valid sound, then you skip 3 and 4. You already have your answer. Put NA. Okay, so you have to give an answer for each of these steps when you actually do the work. But usually 2 of those are going to be NA, and you're going to have the first one and one of those last 3 as actually filled in. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. It's a little bit weird, but we'll practice a little bit. Okay. The smart way to argue online. This is on page 73. That's one of those further thought boxes. I'm just going to run down the basics, okay? They give you a little bit more information and some examples there, so I'm just going to begin first by avoiding people you suspect are interested only in scoring points. They're not really interested in finding out the truth or coming to a consensus. They just want to get you, okay? Keep your focus on the argument. Try to understand the other person's point of view and what motivates it. A lot of times, people are motivated towards particular arguments because they're afraid of what might be. And if you know that going in, it's easier to steer them in the right direction than if you don't. Show your opponent moral respect. Take the high road, basically, okay? Rein in your emotions, stay on point, know what you're talking about. This is the biggest issue, I think, with anything online, because people, like we talked about in chapter 2, people tend to think they know more than they do, and they tend to underestimate how much is out there that they don't know. And so you'll have people starting arguments that are not equipped to finish them very well. So don't be one of those folks. And lastly, he says, think twice before trying to engage in a serious argument on Twitter, which we now call X. The short character limit makes conversations about serious and complex issues difficult or pointless. Okay, so basically, it's the same good things that you would do to argue a point in real life, right? It's less, arguing online tends to give people license to be mean. They don't have to look you in the face. They don't see your expression. They don't see that they've hurt you. And sometimes they don't care. It's easier not to care when you're not sitting across from somebody and you don't have to deal with their emotions and their stuff, okay? But be careful that you don't fall into that trap. Okay, there are a bunch of examples for the judging arguments, always answer, step 1, conclusion premises. Step 2, deductive and valid, sound, or NA. Step 3, inductive and strong, cogent, or NA. Step 4, NA, or intended as deductive and failed, or intended as inductive and failed. So you've got options there, right? Okay, the funny one. When reasoning wrecks leave the scene of the accident. So a lot of these they end up being absurd, okay, like this one. 60 men can do a piece of work 60 times as quickly as one man. One man can dig a post hole in 60 seconds. Must not be a very big post hole. Therefore, 60 men can dig a post hole in 1 second. That's not how that works, okay? And there are lots of things that fall into that kind of a, if you follow it to the end, it's like, that's not going to work. Lots and lots and lots. Okay, not too bad so far. 3.3 is finding missing parts. This is the 3-step process, and really, sometimes, starts on page 79. Sometimes arguments come to us with missing or unstated conclusions or premises. Implicit premises are usually things we already know and or agree with, okay? So we don't have to say it out loud. For the telling of an argument, that's not usually concerning. For evaluating, though, we need all the parts in order to make a solid evaluation, okay? We need to fill in the blanks, okay, then evaluate the argument. So many unstated premises can be controversial, and therefore they should not be left unexamined. Remember that the point of articulating unstated premises is to make explicit, basically say out loud, what is already understood implicit. Your job as a critical thinker, though, is not to make a bad argument into a good argument. That task falls to the one who puts forth the argument in the first place, okay? So there's a 3-step process. I would go about this a little bit differently, but this is how the explanation goes. So step 1 is to search for a credible premise that would make the argument valid, okay? One that would sometimes my own handwriting is a little bit weird. One that would furnish the needed link between the premise and the conclusion. The premises are already there in the conclusion. There's something missing, fill it in, okay? And you need to be careful. Choose the premise that is most plausible, most believable in this argument, and fits best with the author's intent, okay? We don't want to go changing their argument for them, okay? We want to be honest, and we want to be as kind as we can be, but sometimes it's just bad. Step 2 is to search for a credible premise that would make the argument strong. Okay, this is for an inductive argument. Okay, again, most plausible, fits with the author's intent. And then step 3 is to evaluate the reconstituted argument. Okay, and I love that word, reconstituted, because it's orange juice, right? Buy orange juice frozen in these little cups, and you put it in, add water, and you reconstitute the orange juice. And it's like that, right? Everything that you needed was really there. You just needed to expand it a little bit, and then it's better. Reconstitute the argument, evaluate, the reconstituted argument. That means run it through the 4-step process for judging. There's one more little piece here, the last couple pages. It's a further thought on reasoning and the law, okay? And it's not meant to be a comprehensive overview of how we use argument in legal proceedings, but it does give us a little bit of again, another scaffold for the back of your head. Arguments are essential parts of legal reasoning at several levels: in the making of laws, in criminal and civil proceedings, in judicial rulings, in the weighing of evidence, and in the application of legal precedent, okay? In legislation, the making of new laws usually involves considerable debate about the wisdom of legislation. The reasoned argument is the presumed medium of the deliberations. Now, we can make fun of our legislatures, Congress, Senate, whatever, for how long and how much they argue, but that's their job. That's what legislation is supposed to do. It's supposed to be well-reasoned, wise, and have the backing of good reasons. So, perfect world here. Legal proceedings, okay. In civil matters, litigation takes the form of opposing parties arguing the merits of their side. The point of the arguments is to show that a litigant did or did not legally transgress in some way, okay. In criminal cases, prosecutors argue that the defendant did in fact commit a crime. Defending attorneys argue against that conclusion. The arguments are mainly inductive, using inference to the best explanation, which we will go over in detail in chapter 11. Okay, judicial rulings. And in recent years, this has gotten kind of a bad turn, I guess. But the thinking involved in judicial decisions is complex, entailing judgments about the meaning and application of statutes, laws we already have, assessments of the relevance and implications of cases that we've already seen, and reasoning on both inductive and deductive kind. A common argument pattern is analogical induction, which is argument by analogy, more from chapter 10. This case, and this is basically what it boils down to. This case is similar to a previous case, and so it should follow that particular answer. Okay. In Anglo-American law, decisions in previous cases, legal precedents, carry considerable judicial weight, and arguments by analogy reflect this fact. Analogy, like something. This is like this. So we did this here, we should do the same thing here. And on one hand, legal precedent is wonderful because you know kind of where you stand. In other ways, legal precedent and any kind of precedent that we're going to use, we've done it this way before. That gets us into trouble when what we did before was really wrong. It was sexist or racist or whatever the other is we want to fill in on there. It doesn't protect people's rights. And that's really the job of legislation and legal proceedings and all that, is to protect the law-abiding citizen from the non-law-abiding citizen, right? So we have a lot of things to go on with. So this section, of course, we got our argument basics going. Deductive argument intended to provide logically conclusive support for its conclusion. Inductive argument intended to provide probable, not conclusive support for its conclusion, and all kind of the permutations with that. In this section, we also learned about the 4-step process for judging arguments, for figuring out whether they're inductive or deductive and how good they are. We also did the 3-step process of filling in the blanks, basically implicit premises. And then in the next section, in 3B, we're going to talk about that other process with 5 steps. So I hope that helps. I hope that you've figured some things out here. Excuse me. If you have questions, you know how to get a hold of me. You have my email. Okay?